Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Real Talk with Eugene. Oh, man, Real Talk with Eugene, where we create a platform for conversation, having a real talk about what's going on in the world. And today I am so honored to have my good friend, the Reverend Dr. David Alexander, who is the senior minister of Spiritual Living Center, Atlanta. How
What
you
up?
doing, brother man?
I'm well. How are you, brother?
I'm good. I'm good. Just real fast, I want to give a shout out to the New Thought Media Radio Network for hosting this. I'm so very happy to be a part of this. So you guys want to check them out. They have a Facebook page, New Thought Radio Media Network, and here we are.
Here we
So
are.
I haven't talked to my brother David here in a while, and he happened to be sending some comments on last week when I was on with Reverend Masando. And so I reached out to him and wanted to ask him on for this week, Real Talk. Again, and I'm on this, I have to say, I'm on this kick, right, about having a new thought on new thought. And it's going to keep expanding. And so that's what Reverend Dr. David Alexander and I will be speaking about today, especially when we're talking about things that are going on now. Here we are in 2020 in the United States of America. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff going on. And so my question in terms of new thought, specifically, particularly science of mind and spirit, how are we showing up? And is there a way of us doing this? And the question that I have, right, is the philosophy, is the teaching still relevant? Great question.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just get a few words in from my brother here, David, who's down in Atlanta, Georgia.
The ATL, man. Hey, listen, it's good to be on with you, and it's good to see you and chat with you. And I've been enjoying the conversations that have been rolling here. Is New Thought relevant? I've been talking about that for a long time, talking about what I used to have a lot of conversations online about, this concept of theological relevance, right? Which is applying our theology in contemporary cultural context in a way that speaks to what is happening right now. Because back in the day, and maybe even still continuing a little bit, we had kind of this surge of ministers, former ministers, retired ministers, who make a lot of noise in our organization about this notion that the church is dead, that brick and mortar church is dead, that the format that we use is old, and just look at the churches in Europe and they're all empty, and so on and so forth. And look at the Pew Research of church decline in America over the last 50 years, and et cetera, et cetera. And these conversations would always frustrate me because they were looking at the effect, never the cause. And I found that odd coming from New Thought people. It's like, I thought we were cause people, right? So yeah, we're looking at an effect. Yes, it's been on a decline. But what is the cause? And yes, it happened in Europe. What is the cause behind that? And the cause behind that is the degree to which the denominations, and you pick any one that you want to talk about, the degree to which they have a relevant theological message, a sense of internal vibrancy around theological relevancy. And so the research says, how many young people are not going to church? Well, and then you say, and this generation is going to church less than that generation. Yes, that's true. That's all at the level of effect. But none of those surveys actually bother to ask why.
Why?
And the why is because, why would I? It's not speaking to me. It's not giving me anything. It's not relevant to my life. If I felt like it was helpful, giving me context, helping me make sense of the world, then of course I would make time for it, whether it was online or in person or whatever, because we all make time for things that we find useful, right, and helpful. So it's not just that it's going by the wayside, that it's, as one of our mutual colleagues would say, that, it's time to get out of the horse buggy whip salesman business. It's like, because nobody's even if you got the best horse buggy whip in the business, it's like, well, that business is going out of business, right?
Right.
I think that is a false analogy, and time will still tell who's right in that conversation. But I think that we are in a moment where we're seeing that indeed this concept of theological relevancy is more important now than ever. Churches have more or less paused on their brick and mortar formats, but the church has left the building, right? Church is more alive than it's ever been. Spiritual community is more relevant than it's ever been. Finding some spiritual nourishment and connection with community and some way to make sense of all the stuff that is happening is more important than it has ever been. And when we do get back to brick and mortar, I think they're going to, assuming we open post vaccine and full vibrancy and health, I think they're going to be fuller than they've ever been, so long as people feel like there's something there for them that they're longing for, because there is a great longing. There's a great spiritual starvation happening in humanity, and we see it on the news and in the streets every single day. And so our job is to find a way to help provide a salve and a food and a nourishment to that spiritual starvation that is at the core of humanity. Let's be clear. We can talk about racism. We can talk about discrimination. We can talk about structural racism. And I want to talk about all those things. But let's be clear. At the core of all of those things, at the core of this young 17-year-old who, decided to be a vigilante and get his AK-47 and drive across state lines and patrol the streets of not even his own city, at the core, yes, there's racism. Yes, there's a twisted consciousness that's been warped and twisted by white supremacy. But underneath that, if we're talking about the layers of the mattress and getting to the pea at the bottom, right, at the core of all of that is a spiritual starvation and a hunger and longing to belong in the universe.
Yeah.
That's why he's spending all this time on those white supremacy chat groups, because it's giving him something. It's giving him a sense of belonging and a sense of meaning.
Right.
So where is the church in that conversation, right? Where is the spiritual community in that conversation? So are we relevant? Oh yeah, we're more relevant than we've ever been. But it means that we have got to step up to the plate, and we've got to understand some things. You said, is the philosophy still relevant? And I think part of what we need to do is parse out what we mean by philosophy versus theology. I think it's a very important distinction as it relates to, how we're approaching this collective consciousness conversation right now.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you, David, from your perspective, what is the difference between philosophy versus theology?
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, I led you right to that. Yeah. So, so we have this distinction, right? We have these two aspects of our teaching that people will say, well, New Thought is all about your personal consciousness, doing your own work, looking within, examining your own, if I just get right with my own consciousness, it's all about me examining my own beliefs. And if I can see the world as whole and complete, then the world will be more whole and complete, right? That is, there's no denying that. The literature is chock full of that message. And that is true. All of that is true. At the same time, on the other side, we have this deep principle of oneness. And what does it mean to be one with all of humanity? What does it mean to say there's only one thing happening here? right? What does it mean to say there's only one power, one presence, and it's expressing in, through, and as all life? When you start to embrace what I call the radical implication of oneness, that's been a major theme in my preaching and teaching for years, is what is the radical implication of this idea that we're talking about today? So whether it's prosperity or health or wholeness or oneness or pick any principle, what's the radical implication? What I mean by that is take it out to its furthest reach. How far does this principle go, and what is the ripple effect of me deciding this idea is true? That I'm whole and complete, that I have access to everything that I need, that I am one with a power greater than myself. Again, pick whatever principle you want and follow the ripple effects out all the way out to the farthest reaches. And the radical implication of oneness is there is no them, right? There is no other. And what that does is that directly bumps up against and ricochets up against this notion of it's just me and my consciousness, right? If I just get myself right. No, there is no yourself. You are not you are not separate and distinct from the allness of the oneness of humanity and the oneness of God. You're not an island unto yourself. You exist in community. And so here's the thing, right? Let's just dive in on this. Mm-hmm. Because I think what we need to do, the new thought on new thought that we need to have, is we need to reclaim ourselves as a theology of liberation.
Yes.
Right. And so I'll say something that might sound a little controversial, but we can go into it and unpack it. This teaching, going back before religious science, the new thought teaching as a whole, going back 150 years, in all of its variations and denominational organized expressions, this teaching, in the hands of people of color and leaders of color, prominently African Americans, this teaching has always been a teaching of liberation.
Right.
Look at Reverend Ike, look at Dan Morgan, look at Johnny Coleman, look at Michael Beckwith, look at, you can take your pick. It's always been a teaching of liberation for all the people. It literally follows the tenets of liberation theology, which we can also break down if you want to. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, this teaching, going back 150 years, in the hands of people that look like myself, white identified Euro-Americans, has almost always, not exclusively, but almost always been a teaching of privilege. It's been a teaching that has been somewhat, right? There's the controversy, right?
Right.
With people of color, it's always been a liberative teaching. White people, it's almost always been a teaching of privilege. It's been a teaching of me and mine, and let me get mine, and let me figure out, parking places, princes, palaces, that whole thing, right? Let me manifest my good and get my Mercedes and whatever. Nothing wrong with any of that, right? But there's no room in the context of how it is expressed in those forms for the other, for the allness of humanity, for what does that mean? What does you getting your good mean about your relationship to your brothers and sisters and your relationship to the community? That the answer tends to be, well, they got to do their work, right? If they take the classes that I took, then they can get free too. And it's like, no, there is no you separate from them, right?
Right.
Yes, you can be an example, but so that, and so I don't say that to cast anybody or any part of our movement as bad or wrong, but rather to illuminate something,
right?
That our teaching has been infected and affected by right. Come on now. Infected and affected by the larger consciousness of, I got to get my my chats, my messages to stop dinging here. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Just keep going.
We've been infected and affected by the larger dominant consciousness of white supremacy, right? Because
Yeah.
whiteness, because here's the thing. Whiteness is, again, first of all, a social construct, not a skin tone.
Right.
And as a social construct, it is devoid of place and space, right? It's devoid of cultural context. It exists on its own in the universe, and it feels impelled and compelled to project itself onto the world, to project meaning onto the world, so whiteness, from, we're talking, as you were talking before we started about the carving up of Africa, the doctrine of discovery, right? The Pope literally ordaining, go out, explore the world. Whatever you find belongs to you, and whoever is there, it belongs to you, and you can convert them to Christianity for the sake of Christ and the kingdom, right? And so devoid of place, get to foist my meaning onto the world, and therefore that consciousness says I get to reap the world's, harvest the world's resources and people for my own benefit.
Right.
That is a hallmark of the consciousness of whiteness, and that's what it's done all over the world. And that's, in other words, colonization, right? I just did a really fancy way of describing the colonization consciousness, and so in that, our New Thought theology, here's here's the rub, right?
Yeah, bro. Come on.
New Thought theology, or let me correct that. I still haven't answered your question of the distinction between theology and philosophy. New Thought philosophy, in the context of what I just characterized, colonization, actually sounds very appealing, right? It's actually very, very appealing. And that's why we see, if I make it even more present to today's current context of basically liberal versus conservative consciousness, right versus left, if we want to talk about the political spectrum, we shouldn't be surprised that a lot of conservatives are actually very attracted to New Thought teaching, because this idea of self-empowerment, do it yourself. Right. It's all up to you. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You get your good. And if anybody else wants to do that, well, then that's on them. But you take care of you. The philosophy really feeds that narrative really, really well. And so, so I think sometimes we're surprised that we have conservatives in our congregation. We shouldn't be, right? Because that narrative is fed very well by our philosophy. So here's the deal. Philosophy is personal.
Correct.
Right? It's the individual. I have a personal philosophy. You have a personal philosophy, and we apply our personal philosophy to our individual lives to the degree that we think we have an individual life. Theology is communal. Theology is collective. Theology is about a greater context of the world in which we live, right? Just the very definition of it. Theos is, God. Ology, the knowledge, wisdom, or understanding of. So the understanding of God is not an individual. God is the intelligence of the universe, the divine presence, the creative force of the universe. So the understanding of the creative force of the universe and our relationship to it and its relationship to us. Any philosophy, any theology that you study, that's what you're studying. You're studying, how do we think about God, and how does God think about us? What is God's covenant with us? What is our covenant with God? Right? That's the essence of theology. So theology can't be individual. Theology has to be communal. It has to be collective. And so our principle of oneness exists in our theology. Our principle of individual, take care of your consciousness exists in our philosophy. The teaching is both, right? The teaching of the science of mind is, right, if I could do a Venn diagram, right? It's the intersection of those two ideas. We have a philosophy, But the totality of our teaching, just read the book, right? Read any of the books. The totality of our teaching is not a philosophy alone. It has too much theology in it, right? And the totality of our theology is not theology alone. It's got too much philosophy in it. It's both simultaneously. And so where we are as a movement is the deep embrace of understanding the implication of that. You, in other words, you can't, well, you can. Let me, it's hard for a New Thought person to tell somebody what people say, watch me, right? But it's hard. It's very difficult to sit in a New Thought church and just say, well, I'm going to take care of me and mine and mind my own business and study my own consciousness. And the rest of the world is, they're on their own because it's just me. That goes directly against our theology of oneness. Okay. Right. So it means that now you're anchored in the philosophy and you're applying the philosophy to yourself. Good for you. But we need to call that what it is. If we call that our theology, then we need to be very clear about the label. And this is what I mean. So this is the choice point that our entire movement is at. If that's how we want to define ourselves collectively, then we have to call that what it is, which is a theology of privilege. That's it, right? Are we a theology of privilege? Are we a theology of just those that can, those that have the luxury to take a prosperity class, those that have the can afford to, sit in church and contemplate their health and wholeness and manifest their good, devoid of thinking about the systems that created the structures of oppression around them and how consciousness plays into that? Is that what we are? A theology of privilege? I choose to say no. We are more than that.
I choose to say no. Correct.
Right? We are more than that. And if we're more than that, then we have to call out that behavior and say no. That now, if there's somebody in my congregation that is saying that's what I want to do, then I say, you know what? You go work on you. But when you come here on Sunday, you're going to hear about the us. You're going to hear about the collective. You're going to hear about how you doing your work feeds the healing of the planet and all of us and how we're all in this together. And if that, I love it when I hear, the feedback sometimes. I don't get it much anymore in Atlanta, but I used to, the feedback of, well, this is upsetting my, what you said is upsetting my, I'm paraphrasing, but basically upsetting my political disposition.
Right.
And my response to that is, if what I teach on Sunday is upsetting your political disposition, then take it up with your political disposition. Don't take it up with me. Right. Take it up with the consciousness that has you think that what I said is somehow upsetting. Examine that.
Right. Exactly.
What you came to, but don't try to govern what I'm going to teach, because if what I'm teaching is upsetting your political disposition, well, then maybe it needs to be upset, right? Maybe that needs to be turned over. It's not for me to tell you how to vote or how to think politically, but if it's upsetting you, then maybe you need to examine that, right?
Exactly.
Too many of our clergy are sort of afraid of that confrontation, and I'm just not. I just choose not to be.
Because we don't have time. We don't have time to be afraid. It's way past that. So there was something that we were speaking about briefly before we went live, and I want to bring this question up, to you in the few minutes that we have left. Is so knowing that this teaching, well, depending on how you look at it, is a teaching, it's as a teaching of, freedom, a teaching of liberation.
Yes.
And I love the way that you put this in terms of how do we recast as an organization or as New Thought, or now let me just keep it specific to science of mind, religious science.
Mm-hmm.
How do we recast this as a teaching of liberation?
Yeah, this is a great question.
One of the things
because I think that's the task that we're up to. That's what those of us who are crafting messages and speaking to communities. We're 150 years old. So when we look at Christian history or even Jewish history, we haven't even gotten to really to, it took the Christians 300 years to settle their doctrine. Right? We're not even halfway there on that, right? So the fact that we're in a little bit of confusion about that, it's perfectly okay. From a New Testament perspective, right, 150 years in, we're at about the time where the Gospels were being written, where the epistles were being written,
right.
And so I like to think of some of our teachers and speakers out there. We are the epistle writers right now. This is the letters to the community saying this is how to do this, folks, and we got to be brave and bold in those letters, and let the future judge us of whether we were how spot on we were or not. But this is a bold time of crafting and shaping the future of the movement. Not just saying, well, the book says, we got to interpret. So how do we do that? A couple of things. Liberation theology is first and foremost is always the various forms of it. The Catholic Latin liberation theology that came out of South America or Latin America, the Black liberation theology that came out of James Cone in the late 60s and 70s, womanist liberation theology, so on and so forth, and you can even go interfaith and talk about other forms. But regardless of which form you're talking about, liberation theology is always a response to the dominant theology of the day, and it's a response that is saying you're missing something, right? Mm-hmm. Something incomplete here. You're not speaking to what's happening in the world. You're not speaking to the oppressed. You're not lifting up the least of these. There's something missing. James Cone was responding to what he felt was the white appropriation of a liberation message that had been appropriated by whiteness and turned into an abuse of the original Christian message. And he was responding also to Malcolm X, that was also calling Christianity a white man's religion. And therefore people of color shouldn't belong in Christian churches. And James Cone wanted to respond to that. Gustav in Latin America is responding to the Catholic Church, not addressing the poor in an adequate way. Womanist theology is addressing the patriarchy within theology. So it's always a response. And so when you look at that in that light, New Thought came in the 1800s really as a response to Calvinistic theology, right? To this doom and gloom, we're all worms of the dust and born in iniquity, and right, literally the term New Thought, like you can have a new thought about these ideas, right? This is not what you're being taught. Even Ernest Holmes's mother, right, one day walking back from church when the pastor got a little hellfire and brimstone, said, you don't have to listen to that stuff anymore.
That's right.
She stopped him under a tree and she said, y'all don't have to listen to that anymore because we don't do that, right? We don't do hell and fire and sin. And so New Thought grew as a response, saying there's something missing here. And the something missing is about our connection to wholeness, our connection to oneness, the empowering presence that lives within inside of us. And that is common among all liberation theologies. Liberation theology is identified by basically three things: solidarity with the oppressed, an affirmation that the state of oppression is not our natural state or our destiny, and a desire to unite the oppressed with a liberating power and message, right, through the elements of the faith. When you look at New Thought does all of those things, right? We identify with the common person. We wouldn't use the language oppressed necessarily, but the common person. We identify that oppression, lack, limitation are not our natural state or our destiny. And we seek to unite people with a power that can set them free, the power of their mind, the power of their thoughts, the power of their prayer and affirmation. Those are the hallmarks of defining liberation theology. And it's not just about the individual, it's about
Right.
the community that we live in. Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing, right? Because in you speak, and I know, I remember a conference from years ago, and you were speaking, and this is probably at a Selimar years ago, and you got up with the Bible. It said, "You guys remember this, right?" So I know you know your. But it's interesting in listening to you talk about this, right? It's a liberation theology. It's about being together with with the common folks, and it reminds me of which was the ministry of Yeshua Messiah. His whole thing was, okay, number one, the way that the religion is being taught, you guys are forgetting the common folks, because we are here to liberate and uplift everyone, and and here we are still talking about and doing the same thing with conviction and with boldness,
That's right.
yeah, it's good stuff, man. Good stuff.
We got a long way
I
to go,
so
but I
much.
think we're on the cutting edge of it.
Yeah, we really are. And New Thought being 150 years old, man, we're just babies, but it's a new thought, because the term I was talking about this on one of the real talks, because we hear new thought, ancient wisdom, and for me, there was a word that was missing: new thought on ancient wisdom. So how do we bring back, I love what you said, man, recast the teaching of liberation theology, and we just be bold, and we just keep doing stuff like this. We keep talking about it. We keep touching lives. We keep going out there and serving in the way that, however you do it, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's it. And are we going an hour or 30 minutes? What was it?
No, we're going a half an hour. I know I want to keep going, but
okay,
but we can't for right now.
Do I need to wind it down or do I need to wrap it up? I guess I need to wrap it up.
Yeah, let's wrap it up, bro.
Well,
but you're gonna be back though.
Okay, yeah, we'll be back. We'll save some of these thoughts for later. I guess what I'll say is that we need to remember in all of this, remember the core of our teaching, right? The core of our teaching, we say that we know something about consciousness, right? That's the essence, right? Consciousness is all that there is. And so if consciousness is all that there is, then anything that's created by consciousness can be uncreated, or a new consciousness can recreate the world.
Right.
So and all the problems that we have are byproducts of consciousness. Racism is a byproduct of consciousness.
Right.
White supremacy, our political divisions, everything, right? So consciousness is at the core, and we know how to do this. We were made for this moment. We know how to identify the thoughts that are no longer serving us, call them out, say, you have no power over me, and to cast a new vision for a new life that we want. And we know how to do it. We teach people how to do this. We say, affirm, state it in first person, present tense, make it now, make it powerful, make it passionate, and declare it boldly, and then take actions that are consistent with that affirmation, right? Don't just sit on your couch and affirm with rose-colored glasses, but affirm boldly, passionately, and then take consistent action with that idea. Meanwhile, continue to call out anytime that old stuff crops up, and so that's the part that often people are afraid to do. We're afraid, oh, you can't call out, conservatives, you can't call out this racist stuff. You're being divisive. No, I'm calling out behavior that's no longer working or serving. I'm allowed to do that, right? I'm allowed to do that. That's what our teaching tells us to do. Call it out, name it, tell it doesn't have any more power over us any longer, right? Sometimes we want to be so inclusive that we want to include the stuff that's not good for us. I'm about to preach a whole nother sermon right there, but I better stop.
Yeah, man. Ooh, my brother. We are just getting started.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, we may, and I'll talk to you about this later, but we may need to continue this one next week. I don't know, but we'll see.
All right.
Because this is the thing. Everybody who's watching, Real Talk is about providing a platform for conversation. And as my brother, Reverend Dr. David Alexander said, people are starving for this. And one of the things I've been saying for the past few years is the world is famished, for this liberation, in all of this. So stay tuned, because we are really about doing some good work on Real Talk with Eugene and whoever comes on. And of course, through the New Thought Media Network. Thank you, Reverend Robert Brzezinski, for producing this show. I want to thank everybody who joined us. I want to thank everybody who commented. Thank you so very much. There is Maureen and Kenneth, and of course our brother Masando and Jackie Faye. Thank you so very much. Leda Mullen says, please continue next week and next week. And the next week. This is the best stuff. I think so too.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Reverend Robert, take us out. Everybody, be blessed. Have a fantastic day, and stand boldly in who you are. Stand boldly in who you are. You are here to help liberate the world through your consciousness. David, blessings to you, man.
You've been listening to Real Talk with Eugene Holden on the New Thought Media Network. If you've enjoyed this programming, please tell a friend and join us next week for more Real Talk with Eugene Holden.